Now, on the consumer front, the National Credit Regulator has warned consumers to monitor their credit health. Statistics show that consumers with impaired records have increased. And joining me now to look at consumer credit health is Louisa Hetisani, who is Manager of Credit Information and Research at the National Credit Regulator, or the NCR. Good afternoon to you, Louisa. Welcome to the studio. You've got numbers now for the first quarter, January to March. What is that telling us? Because a lot of people are saying the consumer is distressed, stretched.
No, thank you for having me. Indeed, what we've seen for the quarter ended March is that the number of consumers that we have who are credit active. Now, credit active means you've got some kind of profile at the bureaus. It increased by 0.6% from 19.97 when we compared to the December quarter to 20.08. But what was worrying is that the number or the percentage of consumers with impaired records has continued to increase. Now, currently we're sitting at about 52.5% of all credit active consumers are in good standing, and the balance of 47.5% have got impaired records. Now, an impaired record simply means the consumer either is 3 months or more in areas with their accounts, they've got an adverse listing against their name, they've got a judgment, some even have got administration orders.
Now, you say 50% of all consumers are, by that definition, in distress, so 3 months in arrears or a judgment against them or something. That sounds very high. How does it compare to other countries? Do you have comparisons?
Unfortunately, we do not have comparative figures, but it is high, and we are worried because, I mean, to have almost 50% of all consumers having impaired record. Now, you know that when you have an impaired record, it simply means that it becomes more difficult for you to be able to access credit. And should you be able to access credit, chances are you will be charged more because you will be seen by credit providers as being of a higher risk.
The number of people is also striking. The number of accounts in the country, 70 million accounts. That's an average of, say, 1.5 accounts per person in the country.
Yeah.
And obviously there are a lot of kids in the country who don't have accounts because they're too young. So it suggests that your average adult has 3 or 4 credit accounts.
That is correct, but let me just clarify the fact that the 70 million accounts that you see is not purely credit. For example, services like your cell phone accounts. I mean, one does pay month on month. So cell phone providers, some of them, they do share that data. You've got insurance companies, but to a large extent, you're right. It is credit agreements.
So that's a lot of people borrowing, and they're not just borrowing on one account. Is there enough cross-checking so that you don't have people borrowing to the hilt on several different accounts, but they don't know about each other?
You know, actually, the National Credit Act states that, for example, if I as a consumer apply for credit, you know, my credit provider is supposed to do an affordability assessment. And to a large extent, most credit providers, what they do is they will go to the bureaus and they will pull my record so that they can see, you know, how many accounts I have or how exposed am I, you know.
How does it work? How does all this information get together in one place so that it's possible to, as you say, pull the account and make the query?
Okay, you know, in a nutshell, credit providers have an association, and in terms of that association, they will go and load data at the bureaus. Now, we've got 12 registered credit bureaus in the country. There are certain rules. For example, if you're going to share information, you know, then you can be able to view, you know, as a credit provider. For you to access records, you must be able to share your own data set, which is to the benefit of credit providers at the end of the day, because it means you've got a complete picture of the consumer.
So the effect, I mean, it sounds like you've got very good data, that the system has integrity, it reflects reality. I'm amazed that so much credit extension still happens, given the numbers that you've said.
And that's why, as the credit regulator, we've been warning, you know, we've been issuing warnings to credit providers and indeed to consumers, you know, to say, let there be responsible credit granting and responsible credit use, you know. Let consumers access accounts or credit or whatever it is, you know, that has deferred payment only when one can afford it, and more importantly, when you really need to have that kind of credit, you know. Because I mean, some types of credit are just too easy to access, and perhaps there's that element of being tempted, you know.
Well, you get sent these cards in the post, you know.
Yeah.
You can have 100,000 Rand immediately if you want it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call that responsible. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is they can find out for themselves what their credit records are. How easy is that? Do they do it?
In terms of the National Credit Act, every credit active consumer has a right, or indeed every consumer has a right to approach any of our 12 credit bureaus and say, can I have, you know, my own copy, so that I can see what information sits at the bureaus, you know, what is being reported. And it's very important that consumers access their reports, because in that case you can even challenge what information sits there, because remember, most credit providers, they make decisions based on what the credit bureaus say about you. And you know, not enough consumers are asking for free credit reports. For example, for the quarter ended March, we've only had about 145,000 people asking for their records. And from that, we've only had about 16,000 consumers going back to the bureaus and saying, you know, I'm disputing this information, it's incorrect. We need more people.
A lot of people perhaps aren't aware that they can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, very interesting, and certainly some of those stats very interesting as well from the National Credit Regulator.